Hey there, Daniel Davis, Deep Dive Army. We have a great guest for you today, something we've been trying to get done for literally for months, and I could not be more happy to introduce to you today former British Member of Parliament, George Galloway, current leader of the Workers' Party of Great Britain and host of the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast. George, welcome to the show. Great pleasure to have you on today.
Colonel Davis, I wish we'd managed to get this together before we entered World War III, which is, as I understand it, imminent. I'd like to thank you for gracing the Mother of All Talk Shows, and I'm very happy to be returning the favor.
Well, thank you so much. And it's going to be a real treat for our folks here today because one of the reasons we've been working so hard to get you on the show is because you're one of those rare Western voices that speaks with a great deal of eloquence, of power, and of passion for people. And that's one of the things that is so it made me so happy to have you on the show here. And I'm really looking forward to getting some of your views on these issues, like the potential to get sucked into major wars, which could expand into World War III in a couple of different venues. But before we get there, in case any of our audience may not know this, in 2005, you did something that all of us want to do all the time, and that's eviscerate the U.S. Senate with power, passion, and logic. And for everybody's sake, I'm going to show you a short clip of that. Watch this.
Thank you. Now, I know that standards have slipped over the last few years in Washington, but for a lawyer, you're remarkably cavalier with any idea of justice. I'm here today, but last week, you already found me guilty. You traduced my name around the world without ever having asked me a single question, without ever having contacted me, without ever having written to me or telephoned me, without any contact with me whatsoever. And you call that justice. Now, I want to deal with the pages that relate to me in this dossier, and I want to point out areas where there are, let's be charitable and say, errors. And then I want to put this in the context that I believe it ought to be. On the very first page of your document about me, you assert that I have had many meetings with Saddam Hussein. This is false. I have had 2 meetings with Saddam Hussein, once in 1994 and once in August of 2002. By no stretch of the English language can that be described as many meetings with Saddam Hussein. As a matter of fact, I've met Saddam Hussein exactly the same number of times as Donald Rumsfeld met him. The difference is Donald Rumsfeld met him to sell him guns and to give him maps, the better to target those guns. I met him to try and bring about an end to sanctions, suffering, and war, and on the second of the 2 occasions, I met him to try and persuade him to allow Dr. Hans Blix and the United Nations weapons inspectors back into the country.
Now, sorry, I should have set that up by saying you had been accused of doing any number of things to violate the Oil for Food program, that you had personally enriched yourself. And all of that stuff was set up by this long period of him just detailing accusation after accusation after accusation. And Gary and I were talking before you came on here, and we're like, wow, I don't know how you had the self-control all the time he's reading that. You just sit there very stoically and then go on there, but well done.
Stoic is my middle name, Colonel, and I don't frighten easily. In fact, I told him before the hearing began, don't make the mistake of imagining that I'm afraid of you. I'm afraid only of God. This put him back on his heels a little bit. And, you know, I used to be a boxer in my youth, and I know when you get that look in your opponent's eyes, that they no longer want to be there, that they're hoping for the bell or even perhaps a towel to be thrown into the ring. And I saw that quite early doors in the proceedings on the Hill.
Yeah, in fact, you can see when the camera goes back over your shoulder, you can see Senator Coleman there, and he looks really uncomfortable. Like, why do we even get into this? This is
Well,
not
yeah,
going to go good.
as George W. Bush might put it, they misunderestimated me.
I think you would put it like that. Yeah.
He would. For me, it was the opportunity to speak the truth in the court of the Sultan, as the holy books say. And so for me, it was an opportunity. For him, he started out that day as a presidential hopeful, but he didn't end up that way.
It did not go well. It didn't. Well, listen, I want to tap into that same desire to be unafraid of telling the truth. And we're going to start off anyway by looking at the Israeli Iran situation, because that is the most acute situation that could draw the region into just an explosion, which could draw in not just the United States, it could draw in other nations as well, and already has expanded. And I want to look, first of all, at something that another member of Congress said on Fox News a couple of days ago, Representative McCormick, where he's saying the real problem is we're just appeasing Iran.
These people understand nothing but strength. It reminds me a lot of when Libya was acting up and Reagan hit him hard, and then he subdued himself. He was on his best behavior. Iran doesn't understand appeasement. That's what's been happening during this entire administration since they came in, basically lifting sanctions, giving them back money that has been frozen, that has been used against us. We've had Americans die from weapons made in Iran. We've had ships, naval ships from the United States attack from weapons produced in Iran. We have all of our enemies being supplied by them. They are a bad actor. Quite frankly, I cannot believe we haven't gone after their weapons production in serious ways. They need a smackdown. And quite frankly, it appalls me that we're essentially waiting for them to become a nuclear power when we won't be able to act appropriately. They need to be taken out immediately. This regime is absolutely evil.
You know, no, first of all, just on the surface of it, that last comment that he's saying that they're absolutely evil and should be taken out, as though it's, just an annoyance, something in the trash that needs to be tossed out. Not that we're talking about a regime that's a country that could be talking about, major escalation of war. Just on the surface of it, because I've heard a lot of that in the UK as well with some of the leaders there. They talk about Iran like they're a puppet or a caricature, not an actual regime. How do you view that?
Well, that kind of Manichaean division of the world into good and evil, if you're not with us, you're against us, was the hallmark, of course, of the George W. Bush presidency. But I've got news for Representative McCormick. Iran is a country of 90 million people. That is to say, 25% bigger than the entire population of Britain. It's also the youngest country in the world, with the highest proportion of people under the age of 25. Iran is a country with a highly advanced military industrial complex, all of it built under sanctions, which have not, contrary to what Representative McCormick seems to think, ever been lifted. Neither did they get their money back, as it happens. The money that belonged to them and that was frozen, confiscated by the US government. I've got the worst news of all for him. There was a rumble in the deserts of central Iran over the weekend, which some people thought was an earthquake. But on greater inspection of the seismic record, it was a nuclear weapons test. So Iran is now, like Israel, like the United States, France, and Great Britain, like Pakistan, a nuclear-armed regime. So this is not a fly that he's proposing to swat. This is a porcupine with nuclear-tipped spines. And the idea that you can dispose of anyone who McCormick, whoever he is, whatever he represents, disapproves of, is precisely how we got into this situation in the world today. Mr. Churchill, that's him here on this cup, is the author of the phrase, jaw is better than war. Now, I was a boy soldier. You were a considerably more eminent soldier. I've been in multiple wars. I know the horror of wars and therefore the wisdom of Mr. Churchill's statement. But we have not been prepared to jaw with any of these enemies that fell on the wrong side of this Manichaean approach to the world. And that's how we got here. That's why, as you put it at the beginning of the show, we are looking down the barrel of World War III, not in one theater, but in two theaters, with a third one, the South China Sea, the Straits of Taiwan, looming just over the horizon. And we're no longer in a position to dictate terms to other people, to send gunboats up the Yangtze, to tell them what they have to do. We were that empire. You were that empire. But neither of us is that empire anymore. And so we're going to have to learn to avoid these zero-sum games. We're going to have to learn to realize that win-win outcomes of negotiations are what we need to be seeking. We are no longer the policeman of the world. Well, we've long ceased to be. But I've got news for McCormick. So have you ceased to be, as is being proved on the battlefields of the Ukraine, and as probably very shortly will be proved in the Persian Gulf and in the Levant.
God help us if we get to there. What do you think of his comment that we got into this problem because we just appeased Iran? We haven't been hard enough on him. What do you say to that?
I honestly question the sanity of that. Been appeasing Iran, how? Iran is the most sanctioned country in the world after Russia. Both countries have supercharged their economies, and from our point of view, more melancholy, supercharged their military-industrial complex. The Russian army is the most battle-hardened army in the world, and next to the Chinese, the biggest. And the idea that this is the time when your enemy is at its strongest, that you should be going to war with it, just flies in the face of all logic and is a product of exceptionalism. I say this with all my love for the American people. I have American blood in my veins. My great-grandmother was an American. She emigrated from New York to Scotland when hundreds of thousands were sailing in the opposite direction. I love your country. I've been there, coast to coast, sea to shining sea. I mean no offense to your American viewers. You're just not that exceptional. And it's this idea of exceptionalism, whether Israeli exceptionalism or American exceptionalism or a century ago British exceptionalism, that era is dead and gone. And the quicker we realize it, the better we'll be able to get along with people who are not just catching up with us, but have now long overtaken us. China is the greatest manufacturing power on the planet. That's not going to change, even if Donald Trump does manage to halt the Rust Belt deterioration. America's never going to be the greatest manufacturing power on the planet, ever again. That title has passed to China, and they will outstrip us. The best way to handle these situations, I can say this as a Brit whose empire disappeared, is to get close to the people where the sun is shining and share some of the warmth, have a win-win relationship to them. That's the opposite of what we are doing. We look at threats and we want to go to war with them. We sanction them, we arm up against them, we fill the airwaves with hostile propaganda, we fund anti-state actors in their country, and if necessary, we are ready to go to war with them, it seems. That would be the biggest mistake in history.
I couldn't agree with you more, especially in this theater of war right now, because let me just kind of take a quick survey around what exists right now, not could exist, but does exist. I mean, you have news out this morning that the fighting in the Gaza Strip is continuing on. Basically, Israel has started round 2, and they're starting from the north and they're moving south. They continue to find out that even though they kill so many thousands of people, they continue to have more people rise up to fight. And that is a never-ending possibility there. They're fighting in Lebanon. They're fighting in Yemen. And now then they're thinking about fighting in Iran as well. And as I have been saying, anyone who would listen from a logical, rational military analysis perspective, Israel is fighting in all those different areas with no military attainable objectives, meaning they don't even have an objective that if they succeed, then they can say that they won, because there is none. So all they're doing is fighting an open-ended conflict, which will be devastating for the Israeli people, devastating for their economy, and it already is. And now I would like to ask your opinion, in light of all that environment, what about the possibility of attacking Iran now, allegedly in response for the 180 missiles that were fired last week?
Well, if it isn't insubordination, Colonel, let me, if I may, ask you a question. It's a one-word question. Why? Why are we doing all this? To preserve the right of Benjamin Netanyahu to kill whomsoever he pleases in the land that he occupies. I understand why a Jewish nationalist, because that's what Zionism is, Jewish nationalism, Jewish exceptionalism, I understand why he wants to ethnically cleanse 2.5 million Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. If he could, he would ethnically cleanse every last Palestinian, including the ones that are citizens of Israel. I understand that. What I don't understand is why the rest of us are prepared to risk World War III, are prepared to beggar our economies, are prepared to make 2 billion enemies, because that's the number of Muslims there are in the world, 2 billion people that will be dreaming of ways to hurt us, to harm us. I don't understand the answer to my question, why? And the more I look at the American presidential race, I'll make no bones about it, I want Harris to lose. I'd prefer if she lost to Dr. Jill Stein, but I don't care who she loses to, as long as she loses. But the Dutch auction that's going on, where both of the main parties vie with each other to be more slavish to the leader of a country of 7 million people, thousands of miles away, I honestly don't know why.
And let me just add a little bit to that, because if you're looking at the opposition, the other primary party with Donald Trump, if you're looking at the Russia-Ukraine situation, you can say, okay, he's a stark difference from there. They have very different views there. But if you're looking in the Middle East there, watch this.
Trump is slamming President Biden's comments last week, where Biden opposed Israel attacking Iran's nuclear sites. Watch this.
I think he's got that one wrong. Isn't that what you're supposed to hit? The answer should have been hit the nuclear first and worry about the rest later.
I mean, there's a battle between Harris and Trump to find out who's more pro Benjamin Netanyahu, and it's so irrational. I cannot get my head around it.
Well, look, I'm hoping that Trump beats Harris. I make no bones about it, for the reason you just adumbrated, that it will make World War III in the Ukraine less likely. That's the only thing I can say for another Donald Trump presidency. But he might cause World War III in the Persian Gulf instead of in the Ukraine. So I scratch my head, even as a matter of simple logic. Hitting nuclear facilities, what does that mean? It means you create a nuclear explosion in Iran. Right. Will the nuclear explosion's effects stop at the Iranian border, or will they kill all life in Saudi Arabia, your closest ally in the Middle East, next door? Will Iran retaliate by wiping out Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and all the other friends of yours in the area, and the American military bases there? Will Dubai disappear in the nuclear cloud? Will the oil and gas ever move again through the Straits of Hormuz? Will you be able to buy petrol or gasoline, as you call it, in the United States, $100 a barrel, $100 a gallon, $500, will you be able to buy it at all? I mean, this kind of insane talk, as if things are consequence-free, that you can bomb nuclear facilities with no downside to it, with no backlash to it. It just seems to me extraordinary. Now, maybe Trump is just jive talking on the campaign trail. How can we know? He does a lot of jive talking.
He does.
But if he really means it, if a Trump presidency means an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, which are all legal, by the way, until that test in the desert at the weekend, all regularly inspected by the international agencies responsible for that, unlike Israel's nuclear weapons stockpile, we've never been inspected by anybody. If he thinks he can do that without consequence, well, we're all going to discover what a terrible blunder, what a terrible miscalculation that is.
Indeed, we are. And to your point you made a second ago about how, in one sense, it may not even matter who wins the presidential election because they both seem to be under the thumb of Benjamin Netanyahu. And one of your countrymen on British media, I thought, really laid this out pretty clearly.
The underlying animosity between Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, and Joe Biden, the American president, is very palpable. In an election year, any American president needs this like a hole in the head. You know, conspiracy theorists will always say America's all behind it. That's rubbish. This is exactly what American presidents do not need in an election year. And Joe Biden has made a series of statements which Netanyahu has privately agreed to and then done the opposite. So first of all, Biden said, effectively, he said, look, we know what you're going to do in Gaza. It'll be awful. Get it over by Christmas. And a year later, still doing it. He said, in January, don't go into Rafah. And they went into Rafah. He said, there is no silver bullet in attacking Hezbollah. Don't try to attack Hezbollah. They've attacked Hezbollah. They've said, whatever you do with Hezbollah, you must have a 21-day ceasefire. No 21-day ceasefire. Even though Netanyahu appeared privately to agree to it, he then went public and said, no, we're not going to do it. And at every turn, the hostage deal, I mean, they were very close to a hostage deal 2 or 3 times. It is widely believed that it was Netanyahu who pulled the plug on the deal when they were close, at least twice. They've been close about 5 times.
So what is your estimation on why this condition exists? The narrative popular is because of the Israeli lobby. They provide money for campaigns and nobody wants to go against them. But it seems that this is much stronger than that. What is your view?
Yes, I mean, I resist always the conspiracy theory that Israel rules America. And I think there are too many people who fall into that trap because they may rule the Congress, they may rule the political class, but they don't rule the real rulers. They don't rule the heads of the American military. They don't rule the heads of American intelligence. They don't rule the people who run the American economy, the American finance sector. They don't rule Wall Street. They don't rule the owners of your major corporations, every one of whose interests is deleteriously affected by the politicians' slavish obeisance to Netanyahu. You know, people think, well, this is all a plan. Well, it ain't a plan by the people who really matter in the United States, because if no oil flows, perhaps ever again, through the Straits of Hormuz, if Saudi Arabia de-dollarizes completely because of the new alignments that are coming into view in the world, Saudi Arabia selling oil to China in Chinese currency and so on. If the kings and sheikhs who rule the Persian Gulf, all of them American allies, if they're all overthrown, if the map of the Middle East is thoroughly redrawn with the more radical political forces, including Islamist forces, being strengthened and coming to power in countries that were previously Western client states, how is that in the interest of America? How is it in the interests of the military-industrial complex, will never sell another gun. They'll all be buying Russian guns. They'll all be buying Russian airplanes and so on. So I asked you the question why, because I don't know the answer. I understand why some here today, gone tomorrow, 2-bit congressman, McCormick or whoever, I understand why they can be bought for a few $100,000. One of the things that amazes me, because money doesn't play quite as big a part in British politics as it does in yours. People I've never heard of, ever, and people who most Americans have never heard of, are getting 6- and 7-figure sums donated to them by the Israel lobby. I understand how you can buy them. That's easy. Just bring along a suitcase with enough dollars in it, and like a parrot, they will speak the words that the person who owned the suitcase wants them to. But I don't understand why the people who really hold the levers of power in the United States.
Indeed, I don't either. And I want to ask it from a related question from a different perspective. And again, this is a question I don't know the answer to, and I'm hoping that you can come up with something that's rational. And that is from the Israeli side. What is Benjamin Netanyahu hoping to accomplish? Because as I said a second ago, from a military perspective, and this is not hard to ascertain, there is no military effective solution to getting rid of the Yemen situation. That's been going on since 2015 when their war with Saudi Arabia, which was never accomplished, or our events in the Red Sea with our power, we can't subdue them. That's continuing on. The Hamas situation, there's without some kind of negotiated settlement with any version of a win-win, that's going to continue on indefinitely. Now then, the Hezbollah fight in southern Lebanon and potentially up the country there, that's even worse of a situation militarily. And if you just limited it to those right there, I don't see how Israel can succeed in not bankrupting their country and losing who knows how many casualties. But then they're even thinking about launching something into Iran itself. What is the outcome? What is the purpose and the objective of the Israeli leadership?
Yeah, he has two objectives, the first of which is paramount. He wants to drag America into the war. He wants America to be at war with the people he has chosen to be at war with, which your founding fathers, I think President Washington himself warned against foreign entanglements, permanent foreign entanglements.
He did.
To drag your country down. He wants to permanently entangle you in a state of animosity with 2 billion, I repeat that number, a quarter of all the world. He wants you to be in a state of total war with them, either guns blazing or guns waiting to blaze in the future. He wants to drag you into a war in a region in which you were once preeminent with your relationship to Saudi Arabia and the other satellites, the principalities of the Persian Gulf. He wants to bring you into a permanent war with a country who had a Shah with which you had the closest possible relationship. He wants to drag you into endless war. And that brings me to the second objective. Not a lot of people know this because it's lost in the fire. Benjamin Netanyahu has been found guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors. He will go to prison, literally prison, once he is no longer prime minister. So he has to remain prime minister to stay out of prison. And as long as there is war and chaos everywhere, as long as all of the Western allies are giving him unqualified support. I mean, half of Israel hates Netanyahu, by the way. Millions of them are on the streets more or less every weekend trying to get him out of office for the last few years, long before October 7th last year. Half of Israel hates him, but all the Western leaders love him and are ready to write any check, pay any price, give any weapon to a man that is facing prison the minute this war ends. the coalition falls apart, he's brought down, and the judges move in. That's why he tried to take the clause from the judges. He changed the constitution of the country, or tried to, so that judges could not get their hands on him for, by the way, pettifogging, thievery, corruption. Not for anything that will go down in history, just for being a common thief. That's what he's going to prison for. So everybody in America should ask themselves, are we not paying too high a price to keep Netanyahu out of jail? What do we care who's the prime minister of Israel? I don't care. They can pick anybody they like, Uncle Tom Cobley, prime minister. I don't care. And I don't care whether the people of America are ready to send hundreds of millions of dollars every year and $17 billion this year. That's your business. What I do care about, I wonder what the people of North Carolina think about it, by the way. I wonder why people, if people don't say to themselves, $750 as a loan that has to be repaid, that's what you get for being caught up in a hurricane in North Carolina, whilst your taxes are paying for a free health service, free university tuition in Israel. Israel has things that no ordinary American could ever dream of, and you paid for it all. But that's your business, not mine. What is my business is that humanity itself will be in grave jeopardy. I read a book, Annie Jacobson, an American author, who wrote a book, I've just read it, called Nuclear War, a Scenario. If you just read the foreword, never mind the book, it will chill your blood. I swear, it will chill your blood. No person in their right mind would do anything that could lead to such a scenario. Yet our political leaders are doing it daily. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and in fact, to really drive home how so many of the Western leaders are enthralled to Netanyahu, one leader who at least stood up a little bit is Emmanuel Macron from France, who said he's going to withhold certain weapons systems from Israel. And Netanyahu went to the air to chastise Mr. Macron. Watch this.
I have a message for President Macron. Today, Israel is defending itself on 7 fronts against the enemies of civilization. We're fighting in Gaza against Hamas, those savages who murdered, raped, beheaded, and burned our people on October 7th. We're fighting in Lebanon against Hezbollah, the most heavily armed terror organization in the world, which was planning an even greater massacre than October 7th on our northern border, and that has rocketed Israeli towns and cities for nearly a year. We're fighting against the Houthis in Yemen and the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria that together have launched hundreds of drones and missile attacks against Israel. We're fighting against terrorists in Judea and Samaria who are trying to murder civilians in the heart of our cities. And we're fighting against Iran, which last week fired over 200 ballistic missiles directly at Israel, and which stands behind the 7-front war against Israel. As Israel fights the forces of barbarism led by Iran, all civilized countries should be standing firmly by Israel's side.
So he really plays into what you just said there, that he's trying to make it an us versus them against the entire Islam world population. And then he says, all civilized nations, ergo they are not. That's kind of his gist there, that he's trying to make this a black and white issue, that we should all be opposed to them. I mean, how do you see the reality?
Well, regrettably, Colonel, I must inform you that following that chastisement by Netanyahu, President Macron immediately stepped down and ate his words with French mustard on them. So he backed down immediately that Netanyahu spoke. So in fact, it's another example of a Western leader who oddly is enthralled by this brute Netanyahu that half of Israel hates. As he was speaking there, I was reminded of the great Indian independence leader Mahatma Gandhi's comment when asked by an American journalist, what did he think of Western civilization? He thought for a moment and answered, Western civilization, that would be a good idea. And if civilization is the mass murder of 165,000 Palestinians in 12 months, 6% of the whole population of the Gaza Strip, 65% of the dead being women and children, if that's civilization, then count me out. I don't want to be a part of that civilization. Every empire has to persuade itself that those whom it has conquered are less civilized than them. Otherwise, how can you justify, in George Orwell's words in the novel Burmese Days, going to other people's countries and stealing their things? How do you justify it if not by virtue of the fact that you are a superior civilization to them? You might, as some once claimed, say you're doing it in God's name, or you can paternalistically say that you are there as a grown-up to hold the hand of the less civilized until they grow up enough to govern themselves, determine their own futures. But in truth, all you're doing is going to other people's countries and stealing their things. And here is the maximum rub. The people of Iran and Iraq were building the world's greatest libraries, inventing algebra, inventing science, when we were painting our faces blue and living in the forest. And if we were painting our faces blue, your people didn't even exist then. Your country was the unspoiled province of the Comanches and the Apaches. So the idea that we are a superior civilization to people whose monuments, whose achievements predate ours by thousands of years is insulting to the intelligence, and only possible because of the complete narrative control which the political class has through its mass media. If not for people like you and programs like yours, the American people would be completely ignorant of any of the things we are discussing here. We only exist in our corner. It's becoming bigger than a corner. Your audience, my audience, are bigger than most, never mind many, of the so-called mainstream media's shows, whose credibility is now at an all-time historic low. Amongst people under 30, only 14% of British people under 30 ever watch BBC News. Wow. That's a stat from the BBC itself. So, wow. The younger generation, the more perspicacious amongst us, have already migrated away from mainstream media precisely because all it does is act as an echo chamber for that kind of Orientalist nonsense. I had a friend, Colonel, I don't know if you ever had the privilege to know him, Professor Edward Said of Columbia University, New York, the most urbane, a Renaissance man, the greatest intellectual in all of the United States in his period. He wrote a book about Orientalism. Orientalism being the foolish idea that the West can look at the East through the eyes of superiority, of exceptionalism. If anybody's exceptional, it's them, not us.
Yeah, no, I've not met him. But I wonder, you talked about the BBC and what the people are thinking there. What is the current situation of the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, in his interaction with Israel? Is it any different over there?
Well, marginally, but only marginally. He pledged his troth to Zionism some years ago. Not through any conviction, incidentally, because I have stood on a platform with him trying to get Israel kicked out of FIFA, the International Football Association. And the banner behind both of us said, "Kick apartheid out of football." That was so long ago, it was in 2015, not even 10 years ago. So Keir Starmer is one of these people, as Oscar Wilde put it, who bears the impression of the person who last sat upon him, like a sofa. Keir Starmer is anybody's and is ready to change his coat according to the needs of the hour. So it's not out of principle, but he is completely compromised. He has pledged his support, as he put it, without qualification to the ideology of Zionism. Now, I don't know about you, and my good wife is seated 5 yards away from me. I don't support anybody without
Qualification.
I don't support even my own wife without qualification. If she does something wrong, I won't support it. But to say that you are committed to a foreign ideology without qualification, you just gave them a blank check to do absolutely anything that they want, because after all, you're going to support them without qualification. So frankly, Britain does what America tells it to do, even when, again, with all respect to the American people, your president is a demented, blithering idiot who does not know what century he's in. As we say here in Scotland, you wouldn't send him out for a loaf of bread and expect him to come back with the right thing. And yet we are ready to follow the old man wherever he wants to go. Older viewers will know that's a Bob Hope and Bing Crosby song.
Right. Yes, I do know that one. Let me ask you, in the last bit of time we have here, you've been a member of parliament. You were elected at a special election earlier this year, really because you seem to be unique in the British Parliament, at least at the time, about caring about the people that were involved here. And we've been talking about a lot of the politics and a lot of the interaction, et cetera. But when you look at the human cost on this, what are your feelings and your thoughts about where our policies are?
Well, I've been in the British Parliament for the most part of the last 40 years. And I can tell you that the level of political representation has never been lower in that 40 years, and I'll warrant never, ever been lower in all of our history. We have a stooge parliament, a pygmy parliament, if you're still allowed to use that word, a parliament of shrunken politicians, most of whom would not be able to place the Houthis or the Yemenis on the map. They know nothing about these things. They parrot the latest talking points that they are given by their leaders. When I entered Parliament for the first time, almost 40 years ago, it was filled with pretty giant figures that would make you turn your head when they passed you by in the corridor of the Parliament. Now, you wouldn't even know who they were. And so when I returned to Parliament, unexpectedly and briefly in February of this year, I expected the whole Parliament to be greatly occupied by the sheer human cost of what had been happening at that stage over the previous 9 months. But none of them seemed remotely concerned about it. And I once asked one of them, are these Palestinian kids children of a lesser God? I mean, I'm a religious believer, so I believe that we are all God's children, and that what happens to someone else's children affects me and affects how I look even at my own children. I have 5 young children, one older child, 6 in total, and the older child has 5 children herself. That's a lot of kids in my life. And I cannot look at them without seeing the children I have been watching for the last 12 months now on my telephone in various stages of amputation, decapitation, of blood and gore, their brains tumbling out of their split heads. I don't understand why this human attrition seems to matter so little. How some people can switch it off, apparently completely. Maybe they don't look at the videos. Maybe they don't look at the pictures. But for me, for any truly God-fearing person, you can't look away, because this is God's creation that you are watching being ripped and torn to pieces, being orphaned in overwhelming numbers. You know that Gaza has the highest numbers of child amputees in all recorded human history. There has never been a time or place where more children were without limbs than are in the Gaza Strip right this moment. And look at it. How is a child without legs, arms, eyes to see? How are they going to live the rest of their lives amidst that rubble? In the Bible, there's a chapter called Eyeless in Gaza. Truthfully, Colonel, the eyeless are us. The eyeless over Gaza are the leaders of the Western countries.
It is just shocking. I mean, I could say the exact same thing about here, that even the public, many people just don't even consider them. It's just collateral damage. It's like, well, that's just what happens when you go to war, with no concept at all of the humanity. And I'm not sure what's going to shake us out of that. I fear, I'll just be honest with you, that because of our lack of empathy for our fellow man, that we're going to get sucked into a war here. I pray to God it doesn't go nuclear or expand into literal global warfare. But I think that we may end up finding ourselves in a war that we suddenly can't just dictate terms to, and we may suffer, and maybe then we'll get our humanity back. But we'll have to wait and see how that works out. But listen, today, I cannot tell you how grateful I am for you to come on today and to, with such both political and moral clarity, examine the situation today. And we just have to hope that whether it's Biden or Harris or Trump, that somebody puts an end to this madness before it goes too far.
God willing. It's been an honor to be on your show, Colonel.
We'll see.
I hope we're all still here to do it again.
I do too.
Now.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back one day, and we'll look more at the Russia-Ukraine side, because that deserves a whole batch all on its own. But in the meantime, we thank you for coming on. We thank you guys for watching to us. Be sure and like and subscribe everywhere you get podcasts. We're on that. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict. Just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you will be taken straight away. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.